A practitioner sits across from a subject. The subject's breathing is shallow, their movements are erratic, and their physiological baseline is spiraling into chaos. The immediate clinical instinct is often to introduce a slow, deep acoustic track. The assumption is that playing a calming sound will force the erratic nervous system to follow suit and slow down. But biological systems do not simply surrender to external environments. When you introduce a slow frequency to a highly agitated state, the two patterns collide. You aren't soothing the system. You are creating systemic dissonance, adding a conflicting layer of sensory friction. The absolute foundational rule of acoustic intervention is that sensory input must map to the system's current state. It must never map to the state you want the system to be in. Remember, sound is not a corrective tool. Attempting to use it as a wedge to forcefully shift a physiological state actively disrupts the body's natural regulatory mechanics. Sound modulation is the intentional use of sound to influence the state of a system without directly intervening through force or instruction. It is a support mechanism. This diagram illustrates the correct protocol. Instead of introducing a contrasting pattern, you introduce a secondary wave that precisely matches the subject's current chaotic frequency. Only after achieving synchronization do you gradually lengthen the period, allowing the primary wave to naturally elongate alongside it. The dynamic here reveals a strict boundary. Sound does not create change. It strictly modifies the conditions in which change occurs. To apply this effectively, we have to map the specific mechanics of acoustic interaction, the rules of state matching, and the feedback loops required for safe modulation. Predictable clinical influence is only possible when you operate entirely within the parameters of the subject's existing physiological momentum. Sound interacts with a physiological system through three specific mechanical pathways. The first is state shifting. Through rhythm and frequency exposure, acoustic input can slow down physical activity, sharpen focus, or deepen relaxation. This matrix outlines the mechanisms. Column 2 shows rhythm entrainment. Biological systems synchronize with external patterns, stabilizing internal timing, like a breathing rate. Column 3 is amplification. Sound increases what is physically present. If unstable, the input magnifies the instability, compounding the distortion. Because sound primarily amplifies existing conditions, highly accurate observation of the baseline state is the mandatory prerequisite for any acoustic intervention. You have to know exactly what you are amplifying. Input selection relies entirely on those current conditions. We can map the physiological baseline to 4 fundamental system states. The grid maps 4 states to acoustic requirements. Bottom left, the slow state needs low-frequency rhythms for rest. Bottom right, the transitional state uses mid-range rhythms. Top left, the stable state, is maintained with moderate patterns. Top right, the active state, deploys faster rhythms for mental clarity. The universal rule across all 4 quadrants is strict. Match the input exactly to what is already occurring. Never attempt to force a directional shift. Proper acoustic selection acts as a supportive scaffolding for the physiological state that is already present. It is never a wedge trying to pry the nervous system into a new direction. Even with the correct input selected, timing is a strict constraint. Acoustic input is only introduced when the physiological system is entirely readable. A system is readable when breathing is steady, the baseline state is clear, and microreactions are trackable. Conversely, there are clear physiological red flags that demand you withhold sound entirely. Escalating emotional intensity, chaotic behavior, or ambiguous physiological signals. Again, because of the amplification mechanism, introducing sound to an erratic system will multiply the chaos, not correct it. Strategically withholding sound during systemic chaos is an active, necessary clinical decision. It ensures you do not mask critical physiological distress signals with unnecessary sensory noise. When conditions are appropriate, sound modulation requires a closed-loop control structure to manage the dynamic biological response. This operational loop begins with Step 1, continuously observe the baseline. Step 2, select an appropriate input, if needed. Step 3, apply sound at a low, non-dominant intensity. Step 4, observe the systemic response. Step 5, adjust or remove the stimulus, completing the feedback cycle. Practitioners track specific physiological indicators. Smoother breathing, reduced tension, and sustained attention signal that the system is successfully integrating the input. Negative indicators warn of system rejection. These include sudden agitation, dissociation, physical discomfort, or physiological fog. If any negative indicators appear, the mandatory response is immediate. Reduce the intensity, simplify the input, or remove the sound entirely. Minimal input produces the clearest feedback. The system's real-time response, not the practitioner's intention, is the only metric that dictates whether the input continues. Sound modulation does not exist in a vacuum. It operates within a much broader hierarchy of total environmental control and clinical interaction. This is the hierarchy of influence. Tier 1, the wide foundational base at the top, is rigorous observation. Below is Tier 2, the practitioner's internal regulation. Tier 3 is direct physical interaction. At the absolute bottom is Tier 4, sound modulation, a purely supplemental variable. Prioritizing sound over observation or direct interaction inverts the entire clinical structure. It dangerously relies on a secondary support mechanism to do primary, load-bearing clinical work. The modality has strict biological limits. Individual neurological sensitivity varies wildly from person to person, meaning physiological effects are never entirely uniform or predictable. Continuous overuse degrades the system's sensitivity. Excessive acoustic input simply becomes noise, masking the true underlying clinical signals. The ultimate safety rule is straightforward. When any uncertainty arises regarding the subject's baseline or their response, the default action is always to reduce or remove the stimulation entirely. Sound modulation is a controlled, minimal, and responsive method of environmental input. True clinical mastery of sound modulation lies in subtlety and restraint. You use it strictly to support rather than override the body's natural regulatory mechanics.